For 800 years, an advanced civilization flourished in Britain before a single Roman soldier set foot on its shores. 800 years. That is longer than the time separating us from the Crusades. During this vast span, Iron Age Celts built more than 3,000 hillforts across the British Isles, some with ramparts 20 meters high enclosing areas large enough to house modern towns. They created trade networks that brought Baltic amber, Alpine salt, and Mediterranean wine to British shores. Yet most of this history has been lost, buried beneath Roman propaganda and centuries of neglect. How did a civilization this enduring, this architecturally impressive, and this economically connected virtually disappear from our history books? Let us uncover the truth about Celtic Britain and the people who shaped these islands long before Rome arrived. Around 1200 BCE, Britain stood at a precipice it could not yet see. For centuries, the island had thrived as a vital node in an intricate web of Bronze Age commerce, its rich deposits of tin and copper making it indispensable to the ancient world's most coveted technology. Ships crossed treacherous waters to reach British shores, carrying not just trade goods but ideas, beliefs, and innovations that connected this distant land to civilizations as far away as the Mediterranean. The great bronze works of Mycenae, the weapons of Egyptian pharaohs, the tools that built empires, all depended on metals that flowed through networks stretching back to the mines of Cornwall and Wales. But nothing lasts forever. The first signs of trouble appeared not in Britain, but across the eastern Mediterranean. One by one, the great Bronze Age civilizations began to crumble. The Mycenaean palaces burned. The Hittite Empire collapsed into dust. Even mighty Egypt, though it survived, found itself besieged by mysterious invaders the records call only the Sea Peoples. Historians still debate the precise causes, this cascade of catastrophes that swept across the ancient world like a plague. Drought gripped the lands. Harvests failed. Trade routes that had flourished for generations simply ceased to function. Without the flow of tin from the west and copper from Cyprus, bronze production faltered. The very foundation of civilization seemed to shake. Britain felt these tremors deeply. The boats stopped coming with such regularity. Demand for tin plummeted as continental societies turned inward, struggling merely to survive. Mining communities that had prospered for generations found their primary market evaporating like morning mist. The elaborate trade goods that had once flowed into Britain, Mediterranean pottery, Baltic amber, Irish gold, became increasingly rare. Then the climate itself turned hostile. Starting around 1100 BCE, temperatures began a steady decline that would last for centuries. Springs arrived later, autumns came earlier, and winters grew harsher. The agricultural surplus that had allowed Bronze Age society to flourish diminished. Coastal settlements faced rising seas and increased storminess. Pollen records tell a story of expanding bogs and retreating forests, of land becoming less hospitable to human habitation. Communities that had grown comfortable began to fracture. Archaeological evidence reveals telling changes. Hillforts, once rare, started appearing across the landscape, crude defensive positions suggesting a world growing more dangerous. Bronze hoards, carefully buried in the ground, increased dramatically. Were these offerings to gods who seemed to have abandoned humanity? Or were they the desperate savings of families hiding their wealth in times of chaos? By 800 BCE, the Bronze Age world that had defined Britain for over a millennium lay in ruins. But from this collapse, something new was stirring. The stage was set for a transformation that would reshape the island entirely. The blacksmiths who changed Britain forever arrived not with fanfare but with quiet persistence. Sometime around 800 BCE, knowledge of a revolutionary technology began filtering across the channel from continental Europe. Ironworking, already established among the peoples of Central Europe for generations, finally reached the shores of an island still clinging to its bronze traditions. The earliest iron objects found in Britain were modest, almost disappointing. A few corroded blades, some simple pins, scattered fragments that archaeologists must handle with extreme care lest they crumble to dust. Yet these humble artifacts represented something profound. Unlike bronze, which required tin and copper from distant sources, iron ore lay abundantly in British soil. The red and brown stones that dotted hillsides from Scotland to Cornwall could, with the right knowledge, yield a metal harder and more durable than anything the island had known. But iron demanded secrets bronze had never required. The temperatures needed to smelt iron exceeded anything Bronze Age furnaces could achieve. Blacksmiths had to construct new kinds of hearths, learn to maintain precisely controlled heat for hours, master the mysterious process of repeatedly heating and hammering the metal to drive out impurities. The knowledge came gradually, carried by craftsmen who crossed from Gaul, by traders sharing techniques, by the inevitable diffusion of innovation that no sea could permanently block. By 750 BCE, iron production had taken root in scattered communities across southern and eastern Britain. The impact rippled outward like waves from a stone dropped in still water. Forests began falling at unprecedented rates. Iron axes bit deeper and lasted far longer than their bronze predecessors. Trees that would have taken days to fell with stone or bronze tools came down in hours. The landscape itself began to transform. Pollen cores from this period show a dramatic decline in tree species and a corresponding rise in grasses and cereal crops. Britain was being cleared, reshaped by human hands wielding tools of a new age. Agriculture intensified. Iron-tipped plows could break ground that had defeated earlier implements, turning heavy clay soils that had remained wilderness into productive farmland. Communities pushed into regions previously considered marginal. The surplus that followed, despite the cooling climate, allowed populations to recover from their Bronze Age decline. Yet it was in warfare that iron truly announced itself. A bronze sword, however beautiful, would bend or break under sustained combat. Iron blades, properly forged, held their edge through battle after battle. Spearheads could punch through shields that had turned aside bronze weapons. The warriors who first acquired iron arms held an immediate, terrifying advantage over their neighbors. Old hierarchies crumbled. New leaders rose, their power built on access to iron and the smiths who could work it. The social fabric of Britain began rewiring itself around this new technology. Smiths became figures of immense importance, their knowledge guarded, their services sought by ambitious chieftains. Communities with access to good iron ore deposits gained leverage over their neighbors. Trade routes shifted, now following the geography of iron rather than tin. What Britain could not yet know was that iron was merely the beginning. Across the Channel, new peoples were stirring, cultures that had mastered not just iron but complex social organizations, art forms, and ways of war that would soon crash upon British shores like an unstoppable tide. The Celts were coming. They came from the mountains where the salt ran deep. High in the Austrian Alps, near a place that would later bear the name Hallstatt, Celtic peoples had built something extraordinary. Between 700 and 500 BCE, this region became the beating heart of a culture that would reshape Europe. Here, in galleries carved deep beneath the earth, workers extracted salt, white gold more valuable than almost any commodity of the ancient world. The wealth that flowed from these mines funded a civilization of stunning sophistication. The evidence of their prosperity lies in their graves. When Hallstatt elites died, they were buried with riches that stagger the modern imagination. Bronze vessels hammered so thin they seemed to float. Amber beads from the distant Baltic coast. Gold jewelry worked with geometric precision. Long iron swords that spoke of both craftsmanship and violence. Wagons, sometimes entire four-wheeled vehicles, interred with their owners as if death itself were merely another journey requiring proper transport. These burial customs began appearing in Britain around 650 BCE. The first wagon burial discovered on British soil came from East Yorkshire, its wooden wheels long rotted but their iron fittings still marking where they once turned. A chieftain lay at the center, surrounded by bronze brooches of unmistakably continental design. The grave goods told a story of connections reaching far beyond the island's shores, of an elite who identified with something larger than their local hill fort or tribal territory. They identified as Celtic. Trade networks that had once moved tin and copper now carried ideas, styles, and people themselves. Archaeologists tracing pottery designs and metalwork patterns can watch Hallstatt influence spread like ink in water. From Central Europe through France, up the Rhine and Seine valleys, across the Channel to Britain's southern coasts, then gradually inland. The same geometric patterns, the same artistic principles, appearing on objects separated by hundreds of miles. This was not conquest. No Hallstatt armies marched on Britain. Instead, transformation came through slower, more profound channels. Young warriors traveled to the continent seeking prestige and glory, returning with new weapon styles and stories of distant chieftains. Merchants established relationships that would last generations. Marriages between elite families created kinship ties across vast distances. Celtic-speaking peoples began recognizing each other, finding common ground in language, custom, and belief. The language itself remains mysterious. We can never hear how these ancient Britons spoke, but the Celtic tongues that survived into historical times, from Welsh to Gaelic to Breton, descend from roots planted in this era. Linguistic analysis suggests the Celtic family of languages spread not through invasion, but through prestige and utility. When powerful, wealthy people speak a language, others adopt it to trade with them, to marry into their families, to access their networks of power. By 500 BCE, Britain had become thoroughly integrated into the Celtic world. A warrior in Kent could look at a sword hilt from Austria and recognize the design as familiar, proper, right. A tribeswoman wearing amber beads obtained through trade networks stretching to the Baltic participated in a fashion statement understood from Iberia to Bohemia. Shared artistic conventions, shared burial practices, shared ideas about honor, warfare, and the afterlife bound together peoples who might never meet face to face. Yet Britain remained different. The island absorbed Hallstatt influence but adapted it, combined it with older traditions, created something unique. And as the Hallstatt period waned in Central Europe, replaced by the even more vibrant La Tène culture, Britain stood poised to receive the next great wave of Celtic innovation. the island's transformation had barely begun. 600 BCE. The British landscape began to change in ways that would define it for centuries. Across the chalk downs of southern England, atop windswept plateaus and commanding hilltops, communities embarked on construction projects of staggering ambition. They were building hillforts, defensive settlements that combined engineering prowess with strategic brilliance, transforming prominent high ground into fortified centers of power. These were not simple palisades or hastily dug ditches. They were massive earthworks that required thousands of workers, years of labor, and organizational capacity that spoke to increasingly complex social structures. Consider Maiden Castle in Dorset. When construction began around 575 BCE, workers faced a monumental task. They carved ditches into solid chalk, some 15 feet deep, piling the excavated material to create ramparts that rose another 12 feet above the original ground level. The outer circuit of these defenses stretched for more than a mile. Archaeologists estimate the initial construction required moving approximately 20,000 tons of chalk and earth. Without metal tools, without wheels for hauling, Bronze Age and early Iron Age peoples accomplished this through simple physics, human muscle, and basket loads of determination. But why build on such a scale? The answer lies partly in defense, but defensive architecture alone cannot explain the explosion of hillfort construction that swept Britain between 600 and 400 BCE. These settlements served multiple functions simultaneously. They were strongholds, certainly, where communities could retreat during times of conflict. They were also markets where farmers from surrounding countryside brought surplus grain to trade. They were political centers where chiefs held council and dispensed justice. They were ritual spaces where seasonal festivals and religious ceremonies bound communities together. Danbury, rising above the Hampshire countryside, offers our clearest window into hillfort life. Occupied from approximately 600 BCE onward, it underwent multiple reconstruction phases, each revealing evolving defensive strategies. The first ramparts were relatively simple, timber-reinforced walls backed by earthen banks. But by 500 BCE, the inhabitants had begun implementing sophisticated innovations. They constructed multiple concentric rings of defenses, forcing any attacker to navigate a maze of ditches and ramparts while defenders rained down projectiles from above. The main entrance became an elaborate hornwork, with overlapping walls creating a narrow killing corridor where hostile forces could be trapped and overwhelmed. Inside Danbury's defenses, organization bordered on urban. Storage pits, hundreds of them, dotted the interior, each carefully lined and covered to preserve grain through winter months. The scale of storage capacity suggests surplus production and redistribution, hallmarks of centralized authority. Workshops clustered in designated areas. Blacksmiths hammered iron into tools and weapons. Weavers produced textiles. Potters crafted vessels for storage and display. Who organized this labor? Who commanded such resources? The hillforts themselves provide the answer. At centers like Danbury and Maiden Castle, certain houses stood larger than others, positioned prominently near the main gates or highest points. These residences, sometimes surrounded by their own inner enclosures, belonged to a warrior aristocracy that had emerged to dominate Celtic Britain. These chiefs controlled access to trade networks, organized communal defense, and claimed authority over surrounding territories. Their power rested partly on martial prowess, partly on lineage and ritual authority, and partly on their ability to distribute resources and protection to followers. The proliferation of hillforts transformed how power operated. Unlike earlier, more egalitarian societies, hillfort Britain became hierarchical. Territory mattered. Control of productive land, of trade routes, of strategic high ground became worth fighting for. Skeletal remains from this period show increasing evidence of violent trauma. Not total warfare, not genocide, but endemic raiding and skirmishing between rival chieftains seeking to expand their influence. Yet these centers also fostered unprecedented cooperation. Building and maintaining a hillfort required sustained communal effort. Hundreds of people working in coordination, fed and organized, their labor directed toward collective security. Within these walls, something approaching towns began emerging from Britain's agricultural villages. By 400 BCE, hundreds of hillforts dotted the British landscape, each ruling its surrounding territory, each locked in relationships of alliance, rivalry, and trade with its neighbors. The stage was set for even greater transformations. Between 500 and 300 BCE, something profound crystallized across Britain. The hillforts that had risen on commanding heights were not isolated fortresses. They became focal points for emerging tribal identities that would define the island's political geography for centuries. These were not nations in any modern sense. Rather, they were confederations of related families and clans, bound by kinship, shared ancestry, and loyalty to local chieftains. The Irish called such groupings tuatha, a concept that permeated Celtic society throughout the British Isles. A tuath represented more than mere territory. It embodied a people, their sacred places, their ancestral claims to the land, and the complex web of obligations linking rulers to ruled. By 400 BCE, distinct tribal territories had emerged across Britain, each with its own character shaped by landscape and tradition. In the windswept flatlands of East Anglia, the Iceni controlled territories ideally suited to horse breeding and grain cultivation. Their wealth derived from agricultural surplus, and their reputation rested on skilled cavalry warfare. Archaeological evidence suggests they developed extensive field systems, organizing the landscape into productive farmland generations before Roman surveyors ever arrived. Westward, beyond the Severn estuary, the Silures dominated the rugged hills of what would become Wales. These were mountain warriors, intimate with valleys and ridges that offered natural defense against invaders. Their settlements clung to hillsides, smaller and more dispersed than the sprawling hillforts of the lowlands. The Silures would prove in later centuries among the most formidable opponents Rome ever faced in Britain. Their resistance was rooted in this period, when territorial identity fused with landscape into something approaching nationalism. Northward stretched the vast domains of the Brigantes, the largest tribal confederation in Britain. Their name meant simply the high ones or the elevated people, perhaps referring to their highland territories spanning from sea to sea across northern England. The Brigantes demonstrated how flexible tribal identity could be. Archaeological evidence reveals significant cultural variations within their territory, suggesting the confederation encompassed multiple smaller groups united under paramount chiefs through marriage alliances and mutual defense pacts. How did these tribes interact? The archaeological record speaks of complex relationships. Trade flowed freely across tribal boundaries. Distinctive pottery styles, bronze ornaments, and iron tools appear far from their places of origin, evidence of extensive exchange networks. Certain hillforts seem to have functioned as neutral trading grounds. seasonal gathering places where tribes met to barter goods and arrange marriages between leading families. Yet peace remained fragile. Weapon caches buried in boundaries between territories hint at ongoing tensions. Fortification continued unabated. The very existence of such elaborate defenses speaks to endemic raiding, to cattle theft and territorial disputes that could escalate into open warfare between rival tribes. Within tribes, society organized through elaborate kinship networks. Extended families formed the basic social unit, but these families recognized complex degrees of relationship extending outward to encompass entire clans. Your identity derived not just from your immediate parents, but from your lineage stretching back generations. Land belonged not to individuals, but to families collectively. Chiefs ruled not through absolute authority, but through obligation and reciprocity, maintaining power by distributing wealth and protection to kinsmen who owed them loyalty in return. This system created remarkable social cohesion within tribes while simultaneously guaranteeing intertribal competition. Each tuath functioned as a self-contained world, complete with its own sacred groves, its own ancestral heroes, its own territorial boundaries marked by rivers, ridges, and ancient earthworks. By 300 BCE, this tribal patchwork covered Britain. The Atrebates held the south. The Catuvellauni dominated the Thames Valley. The Dobunni controlled the Cotswolds. Dozens more tribes claimed their territories, each distinct yet recognizably part of broader Celtic culture. But change was coming. Across the Channel, the Celtic world was about to face its greatest challenge. What made a Celtic warrior? The question defined an entire social class. For between 500 and 300 BCE, martial prowess became the foundation of Celtic aristocracy. To be noble meant to be a warrior. To be a warrior meant to embrace a code as elaborate as any medieval chivalry, yet far more brutal. Training began early. Boys from elite families left home around age 7, fostered to allied chiefs who would teach them combat skills. This practice served dual purposes. The boys learned weaponry, horsemanship, and battlefield tactics from experienced warriors. Simultaneously, fostering created bonds between families and tribes, weaving alliances through shared responsibility for raising the next generation of leaders. The weapons themselves carried profound meaning. A warrior's sword represented far more than a tool of violence. Craftsmen forged blades with painstaking care, pattern welding iron strips to create stronger steel. They adorned hilts with gold, bronze, and coral imported from the Mediterranean. These swords received names, passed from father to son, accumulating reputations through generations. Archaeological excavations reveal how seriously Celts took this relationship. Wealthy warriors were buried with their weapons, the blades deliberately bent or broken to release their spirits to accompany their owners into the afterlife. Shields too displayed extraordinary artistry. Rather than plain wooden discs, Celtic shields bore elaborate bronze bosses decorated with swirling patterns and stylized animals. The Battersea shield, discovered in the Thames and dating to this period, shows such sophisticated metalwork that scholars initially doubted its age. Its intricate designs served both aesthetic and psychological purposes, identifying the bearer and intimidating opponents. But warfare itself followed rules that would seem bizarre to modern sensibilities. Before major battles, armies engaged in elaborate rituals. Champions from each side would step forward to fight single combat while their comrades watched. These duels could determine entire conflicts. Classical writers later described Celtic warriors hurling challenges across battlefields, boasting of their lineages and past victories, daring enemies to face them individually. Why settle disputes through individual combat rather than mass warfare? The answer lay deep in Celtic values. A warrior's honor, his reputation for courage, mattered more than tactical efficiency. Dying gloriously in single combat brought eternal fame. Falling anonymously in a general melee brought nothing. Champions who won multiple duels became legendary figures, their names preserved in tribal memory through bardic songs. The most disturbing practice to outsiders was headhunting. Celtic warriors decapitated fallen enemies, considering severed heads sacred trophies. They believed the head housed the soul, capturing divine essence and martial prowess. Victorious warriors displayed heads on poles outside their homes, preserving particularly prestigious ones in cedar oil. Archaeological evidence confirms this practice. Excavations at hillfort entrances reveal human skulls mounted prominently where visitors would see them immediately. This was not savage barbarism but religious devotion. The heads represented spiritual power, protecting settlements and broadcasting their defenders' martial prowess. This warrior culture created paradoxes. Celtic society valued individual glory yet depended on collective defense. Warriors sought personal fame yet fought for tribal honor. They created elaborate rules for combat yet displayed captured heads as grisly warnings. The system sustained itself through reciprocity. Chieftains maintained power by leading successful raids, distributing captured wealth to followers. Warriors pledged loyalty in exchange for opportunities to prove valor and gain plunder. Success bred more success. Victorious chiefs attracted more warriors. Larger warbands enabled more ambitious raids. The cycle demanded constant warfare to maintain itself. As 300 BCE approached, this martial culture reached its zenith. The warrior aristocracy dominated Celtic society completely, their values permeating every aspect of tribal life. But beyond Britain's shores, a different kind of warrior culture was emerging. One based not on individual champions, but on disciplined formations. Not on personal glory, but on collective victory. The legions were coming. The thunder of hooves and wheels announced their arrival long before warriors saw them. Celtic chariots, unlike the heavy four-wheeled vehicles of continental Europe, represented a uniquely British innovation. Built light and fast with two wheels and an open back platform, these machines perfectly suited Britain's terrain. Craftsmen constructed them from ash and willow, woods chosen for flexibility and strength. The wheels stood as tall as a man, with iron rims that rang against stone roads. A single axle connected them, allowing remarkable maneuverability. Two ponies pulled each chariot, smaller than modern horses but bred for stamina and speed. The ponies trained from birth to work in perfect synchronization, responding to voice commands and subtle rein movements. Their manes were plated with bronze rings. Their harnesses gleamed with decorated bronze fittings. But the true mastery lay with the charioteer. This specialized role required years of training separate from warrior education. A charioteer learned to control his team while standing on a platform barely 3 feet square, maintaining balance as wheels bounced over rough ground at terrifying speeds. He memorized every ford, every hidden ditch, every slope across tribal territory. In battle, he functioned as driver, bodyguard, and tactical partner to the warrior standing beside him. How did these vehicles function in combat? Roman observers who encountered British chariots centuries later described tactics that seemed impossibly daring. Charioteers drove at full speed toward enemy lines, warriors hurling javelins from the bouncing platforms. At the last moment, they wheeled away before impact. Warriors might leap down to fight on foot while charioteers withdrew to safe distance, ready to extract their partners if battle turned against them. The psychological impact of dozens of chariots thundering across a battlefield, wheels shrieking, warriors shouting challenges, proved as effective as the physical damage they inflicted. Owning a chariot marked supreme status. The vehicles cost fortunes to build and maintain. Breeding and training suitable ponies required extensive pasture land and expertise. Maintaining a skilled charioteer meant supporting another elite retainer. Only the wealthiest chiefs commanded chariot forces. Death ceremonies reflected this prestige. Between 400 and 200 BCE, the most powerful warriors received chariot burials. Excavations across Yorkshire reveal graves where entire chariots were dismantled and buried with their owners. The wet-wine chariot burial contained not just the vehicle but also the woman warrior buried within it, suggesting that chariot warfare was not exclusively male. Bronze fittings, iron tires, even the remains of ponies sacrificed for the journey to the afterlife, all accompanied the deceased. Why did Britain cling to chariot warfare long after continental tribes abandoned it? Geography provided part of the answer. Britain's relative isolation meant military innovations spread slowly. But the deeper reason lay in culture. Chariots embodied everything Celtic aristocracy valued: individual prowess, visible wealth, spectacular display, and inherited status. They represented traditions stretching back generations. This conservative military culture would prove both strength and weakness. When Rome finally crossed the Channel, British chariot lords would astound invaders with their skill and daring. But disciplined infantry formations would eventually prevail over individual heroics, no matter how spectacular the display. Deep within ancient forests, where sunlight struggled through tangled canopy, the Celts discovered their gods. These sacred groves, called nemetons in the Celtic tongue, served as the spiritual heart of tribal life. No stone temples rose here, no grand architecture proclaimed human dominion. Instead, the Celts recognized divinity in living wood and shadow, in springs bubbling from earth, in clearings where deer tracks crossed. The Druids chose these sites with meticulous care. A nemeton might center on an ancient oak, its trunk scarred by centuries of storms yet still standing. Perhaps a stream divided the space, water marking the boundary between mortal realm and otherworld. Sometimes natural rock formations created the sacred architecture, stones worn smooth by generations of reverent hands. The land itself became temple, unaltered except by time and weather. Entry into a nemeton carried profound significance. Visitors removed weapons before crossing the boundary. They spoke in hushed voices or maintained complete silence. The groves belonged to the gods, and humans entered as supplicants, not masters. Druids governed access, determining who might participate in rites and when common people could enter for festivals. The most powerful rituals occurred at night. Torches cast flickering shadows through trees as white-robed druids performed ceremonies passed down through generations of oral tradition. They sacrificed animals, pouring blood onto sacred earth. They burned offerings in fires that sent smoke spiraling toward the stars. Most controversially, they sometimes sacrificed humans, though modern archaeology suggests this occurred far less frequently than Roman propaganda claimed. What did ancient Britons seek from their gods? Protection for crops and herds topped most petitions. Warriors sought courage and victory. Women requested safe childbirth. Entire communities gathered to mark the turning seasons, their agricultural year divided by 4 great festivals. Samhain, celebrated when October gave way to November, marked the year's end when the boundary between living and dead grew thin. Imbolc in February welcomed spring's first stirrings. Beltane in May celebrated fertility and renewal. Lugnazad in August gave thanks for harvest. These festivals drew thousands. People traveled for days to reach major sacred sites, carrying offerings and wearing their finest ornaments. They feasted, drank, settled disputes, arranged marriages, and conducted trade. The gathering served social functions as vital as spiritual ones, binding scattered communities into cohesive tribes. Evidence of religious devotion litters Britain's landscape. At Llanserrig in Anglesey, Archeans discovered over 150 metal objects thrown into sacred waters between 450 BCE and 50 CE. Iron chains, swords, chariot fittings, and slave gang shackles all went into the lake as offerings. The water itself held power, a portal to divine realms. Rivers received similar reverence. The Thames, Witham, and Trent have yielded hundreds of deliberately deposited weapons and ornaments. These were not accidental losses, but intentional gifts to gods dwelling in water. A fine sword represented months of craftsmanship and substantial wealth. To cast it into a river required profound faith or desperate need. Natural features became pilgrimage destinations. Hot springs at what would become Bath drew visitors centuries before Romans built their elaborate complex. Hilltops where wind howled continuously attracted weather worshippers. Caves descending into Earth's darkness served as entrances to the underworld. By 300 BCE, some communities began constructing ritual enclosures, marking sacred space with earthwork boundaries and timber posts. These structures blended natural and human-made elements, suggesting evolving religious practices. Yet the ancient groves remained supremely sacred, their power rooted in untouched wilderness. The Druids guarded these mysteries jealously. They committed nothing to writing, believing sacred knowledge too powerful for permanent record. Students spent 20 years memorizing poetry, law, astronomy, and theology. This oral tradition meant that when Druids finally disappeared, most of their wisdom vanished with them. Yet their sacred places endured. Many Nemean sites later hosted Christian churches, the new religion recognizing and co-opting locations where spiritual power already concentrated. Ancient yew trees still standing in country churchyards may mark groves where Druids once sacrificed to very different gods. In the flickering light of winter fires, a young student recited poetry without pause for 3 days and nights. He spoke of tribal genealogies stretching back 20 generations, of legal precedents governing everything from cattle theft to murder compensation, of astronomical cycles that predicted eclipses decades hence. This was merely his 5th year of training. 15 more lay ahead before the Druids would accept him as one of their own. The Druids formed the intellectual aristocracy of Celtic Britain. Unlike warriors who gained status through martial prowess or nobles who inherited power through bloodline, Druids earned their position through decades of rigorous mental discipline. They served simultaneously as priests, judges, teachers, astronomers, and political advisors. No major decision occurred without their counsel. No dispute reached resolution without their arbitration. Their training began in adolescence. Promising students left their families to study under established Druids, often traveling far from home territories. The curriculum encompassed vast domains of knowledge. Students memorized thousands of verses containing tribal histories, religious rituals, medical remedies, and legal codes. They learned to read natural signs, predicting weather patterns and optimal planting times. They studied the movements of sun, moon, and stars with precision that allowed them to maintain accurate calendars. Why did Druids refuse to write anything down? Roman observers found this baffling. Julius Caesar suggested Druids feared their sacred knowledge falling into common hands. More likely, the oral tradition served practical purposes. Memorization forged the knowledge directly into each Druid's mind, making it instantly accessible without scrolls or tablets. The act of recitation itself held sacred power, and perhaps most importantly, controlling who received knowledge and when maintained Druidic authority. The memory feats these practices produced astounded outside observers. A fully trained Druid could recall not just information but the exact wording of thousands of verses. They maintained mental libraries encompassing their people's entire intellectual heritage. When disputes arose over ancient precedents, Druids cited specific passages from memory, often engaging in competitive recitations to demonstrate their mastery. Their judicial role proved especially powerful. Druids alone possessed the authority to interpret tribal law and impose sentences. They heard cases ranging from boundary disputes to accusations of sorcery. Their judgments carried divine sanction. To defy a Druidic ruling meant risking spiritual contamination as well as social exile. The ultimate sanction lay in excommunication from religious ceremonies. A person so condemned could not participate in sacrifices, attend festivals, or enter sacred groves. Other community members avoided contact with the cursed individual, fearing spiritual pollution. For peoples whose entire social and spiritual life revolved around communal ritual, such exclusion meant effective death within the community. Druids also claimed sanctuary rights. A person fleeing violence could reach a sacred grove and claim Druidic protection. Even pursuing enemies dared not violate the Nemeton's boundaries. This right extended political asylum beyond individual protection, allowing Druids to shelter refugees and exiles, further enhancing their influence. Their astronomical knowledge enabled them to construct sophisticated calendars. The bronze Colin calendar, discovered in France but representing practices common across Celtic lands, divided the year into lunar months with intricate calculations reconciling moon cycles with solar years. Druids determined proper dates for festivals, planting, and conducting important business. Communities depended utterly on their temporal expertise. Political power flowed naturally from these varied roles. Kings consulted Druids before battle. Tribes summoned them to mediate intertribal disputes. Their presence at negotiations lent proceedings sacred legitimacy. Some Druids wielded more practical authority than the chiefs they supposedly advised. By 100 BCE, Druidic influence had reached its zenith. Their networks stretched across Britain and into Gaul, creating an intellectual aristocracy transcending tribal boundaries. Yet on the horizon, Roman legions were massing. And Rome had little tolerance for a priestly class whose power rivaled imperial authority. The waters of Lindo Moss, dark and still, preserved what dry earth would have consumed. When peat cutters struck something yielding in 1984, they uncovered a man who had died 2,000 years earlier. His body remained intact, leather-brown skin stretched over bones, beard and hair still attached to his skull. But the manner of his death told a story more disturbing than simple burial. Someone had struck him twice on the head with tremendous force, crushing his skull. A cord wrapped tight around his neck had strangled him. His throat bore a deep knife cut. Finally, his killers had broken his neck. This was no murder born of rage or robbery. The careful, ritualistic nature of his death spoke of something else entirely: sacrifice. The man found in Lindo Moss was not alone. Across the peat bogs of Britain, Ireland, and Northern Europe, hundreds of similar bodies have emerged from their watery graves. Many show signs of violent death. Some were bound. Others had been dismembered. The bogs preserved them so perfectly that modern investigators can determine their last meals, revealing that many ate ritual foods before their deaths. Why did Celtic communities practice human sacrifice? Roman writers describe the custom with horrified fascination, though their accounts must be treated cautiously. Julius Caesar claimed Druids constructed enormous wicker figures, filled them with living people, and set them ablaze. Strabo wrote of victims shot with arrows or impaled. These descriptions served Roman propaganda, painting Celts as barbaric peoples requiring civilized conquest. Yet the archaeological evidence cannot be dismissed. The bodies themselves testify to deliberate ritual killing. Many victims were young and healthy, not criminals or prisoners of war, but seemingly chosen for their vitality. Some showed signs of high status, their groomed nails and lack of manual labor suggesting aristocratic birth. These were not disposable lives, but valuable offerings. The Celts believed the gods demanded payment for their gifts. Crops failed without divine favor. Battles could not be won without supernatural aid. The natural order itself required constant renewal through sacrifice. Animal offerings sufficed for minor requests. Cattle, sheep, and pigs died regularly on Celtic altars, their meat shared in communal feasts that bound communities together. But desperate times demanded desperate measures. Tribal survival hung in the balance during droughts that withered crops or invasions that threatened annihilation. In such moments, the gods required the ultimate gift, human life. The victims became intermediaries, their deaths purchasing divine intervention. Some may have gone willingly, viewing their sacrifice as the highest honor, ensuring their names would echo through tribal memory. The method of death mattered profoundly. The threefold death found on Lindoman, repeated in other bog bodies, represented a powerful ritual formula. Each element corresponded to different divine forces or spiritual realms. The combination ensured the sacrifice reached the proper supernatural recipients. Sacred pools and bogs served as gateways to the other world. The Celts threw weapons, jewelry, and coins into these liminal spaces, making offerings to the deities dwelling beneath. Human sacrifices joined these treasures, their bodies settling into the dark waters that would preserve them for millennia. Even the animals consumed in feasts carried ritual significance. The arrangement of bones, the portions distributed to different social ranks, the timing of consumption, all followed prescribed patterns. These meals did not simply feed the community, but renewed cosmic bonds between humans, gods, and the natural world. By 50 BCE, these practices faced their greatest challenge. Roman conquest was spreading across Gaul, and the legions viewed human sacrifice not as religious devotion but as abomination demanding eradication. The clash between Celtic spirituality and Roman civilization approached its violent climax. Between 450 and 150 BCE, something extraordinary happened in Celtic Britain. While priests conducted sacrifices in sacred groves and warriors fought tribal wars, craftsmen created art of such sophistication and originality that it would influence design for thousands of years to come. The style arrived from continental Europe, brought by migrants and traders who crossed the Channel with new ideas about beauty and form. Named for an archaeological site in Switzerland where it was first identified, La Tène art rejected the rigid geometry and naturalistic representation favored by Mediterranean cultures. Instead, Celtic artisans developed an entirely different visual language, one based on flowing curves, spirals, and organic abstraction. What made this art revolutionary was its deliberate ambiguity. Look at a Celtic design and your eye struggles to settle on any single interpretation. A curve becomes a bird's wing, then transforms into a tendril, then suggests a human face, all within the same flowing line. The Celts took recognizable forms from nature, plant tendrils, animal bodies, human features, and deconstructed them into abstract patterns that hint at their origins without ever fully revealing them. This was not primitive decoration. The mathematical precision required to create these interlocking spirals and balanced asymmetries demanded extraordinary skill. Craftsmen worked with tiny tools, scribing patterns so fine that modern viewers need magnification to appreciate their complexity. Every curve had to flow perfectly into the next, creating continuous motion that leads the eye endlessly around the design. Bronze working reached heights never before seen in Britain. Smiths developed techniques for creating seamless joins, for inlaying one metal with another, for achieving surface finishes that ranged from mirror bright to deliberately muted. They understood that light itself became part of their art, catching curves differently as viewers moved, making static objects appear to shimmer and shift. The Battersea Shield exemplifies this golden age at its pinnacle. Created sometime around 250 BCE, this bronze shield facing was never meant for battle. Its thin metal would have crumpled under a sword blow. Instead, it served as a display piece, possibly carried in ceremonies or mounted in a chieftain's hall. The craftsmen who made it created 27 circular bosses arranged in perfect symmetry, each one decorated with swirling patterns that flow into one another like water. But the true genius appears in the red glass studs that punctuate the design. These required heating silica and metallic compounds to precise temperatures, a process fraught with difficulty. The glass had to be created, colored, and then inlaid into the bronze while both materials were at exactly the right temperature. One mistake would ruin months of work. Yet the Battersea Shield's maker succeeded perfectly, creating focal points of color that draw the eye through the complex composition. Women's adornment became equally sophisticated. Bronze mirrors, polished to reflect clear images, received elaborate decoration on their reverse sides. The mirror from Desborough in Northamptonshire shows how far artisans pushed the La Tène style. Its back displays patterns so complex that scholars still debate whether they represent stylized faces, abstract plant forms, or purely geometric exploration. Torques, the heavy neck rings worn by aristocrats, became sculptural statements. The twisted metal cables required perfect tension to create their spiral patterns. Terminal heads shaped like animals or abstract forms had to balance aesthetically while maintaining structural integrity. Gold torques weighed as much as 2 pounds, their value measured not just in precious metal but in the hundreds of hours required to create them. Regional variations emerged across Britain. East Anglian craftsmen favored tightly controlled spirals. Welsh artisans developed their own distinctive approach to animal forms. Scottish metalworkers created pieces that showed both La Tène influence and older local traditions, blending imported ideas with indigenous artistic heritage. These objects moved through networks of gift-giving and trade that bound communities together. A chief might commission a torque to present to an ally, each viewing and handling of the piece reinforcing social bonds. The art itself became a form of communication, displaying wealth, taste, and connection to broader Celtic cultural identity. But by 150 BCE, new pressures mounted. Rome's expanding empire cast its shadow across the Channel, and the artistic flowering would soon face its greatest test. In Celtic Britain, the clang of hammer on anvil carried an almost supernatural resonance. Smiths occupied a unique space in society. Neither quite nobility nor common folk, their ability to transform raw ore into gleaming tools and weapons marking them as possessors of arcane knowledge. They stood apart, respected and feared in equal measure, their forges located at the edges of settlements where the boundary between human world and otherworld felt thinnest. The blacksmith's craft involved mysteries that most Celts could barely comprehend. How did dull rock become bright metal? Why did heating and hammering make iron stronger while the same treatment made bronze weaker? These transformations seemed magical, and indeed, smiths cultivated an air of mystery around their work. Apprenticeships lasted years, with knowledge passed down through generations in carefully guarded traditions. A mastersmith might know dozens of ore sources, each producing iron with slightly different qualities, information he protected as jealously as any warrior guarded his battle tactics. The process began in the bloomery furnace, a clay structure where iron ore and charcoal burned together at temperatures exceeding 1,000 degrees. The resulting bloom, a spongy mass of iron mixed with slag, required hours of repeated heating and hammering to produce usable metal. Every blow of the hammer expelled impurities, compressed the iron structure, and gradually shaped raw material into purposeful form. The rhythm of this work, the specific patterns of heating and cooling, determined the final product's quality. Contrary to what Rome's later conquest might suggest, iron had not entirely replaced bronze. Between 400 and 100 BCE, skilled craftsmen worked both metals, understanding that each served different purposes. Bronze remained superior for decorative items, its golden color and ability to take fine detail, making it ideal for jewelry and ceremonial objects. Iron, harder and capable of holding a sharper edge, dominated practical tools and weapons. Many prestigious items combine both metals, iron blades fitted with bronze hilts inlaid with coral or enamel. The development of enameling represented one of Celtic Britain's most significant technical achievements. Craftsmen learned to fuse powdered glass onto metal surfaces, creating permanent decoration in brilliant reds, blues, and yellows. The process demanded exacting temperature control. Too cool, and the enamel refused to bond. Too hot, and it flowed off the metal or changed color unpredictably. Success required not just technical knowledge, but the kind of intuitive understanding that came only from years of experience. Glassworking itself emerged as a specialized skill. While Britain lacked the massive glass production centers of the Mediterranean, Celtic craftsmen created glass beads and inlays of remarkable quality. They understood how different mineral additives produced different colors, how to draw molten glass into threads, how to layer colors for complex effects. These glassworkers occupied their own specialized niche, their products traded widely across tribal territories. Craftsmen organized themselves into loose associations resembling guilds. While not as formal as later medieval organizations, these networks allowed knowledge sharing, regulated training, and controlled access to resources. A young potter in what is now Dorset might travel to learn specific techniques from a master in Lincolnshire, carrying letters of introduction from his own teacher. Finished goods moved along established trade routes, high-status pottery from one region exchanged for metalwork from another. The semi-sacred status of smiths appeared in ritual deposits. Tools themselves became offerings, perfectly functional hammers and tongs thrown into rivers or buried in pits, as though the implements that created sacred objects had themselves absorbed spiritual power. This was a culture that understood craft not merely as practical work, but as a form of creation that echoed the gods' own powers of transformation. As Roman merchants began appearing in southern ports after 100 BCE, they found eager customers for Celtic metalwork, paying premium prices for objects whose quality matched anything produced in the empire's heartlands. The shallow draft merchant ships that beached on British shores during the final centuries before Roman conquest carried more than trade goods. They brought the wider world to Celtic doorsteps, connecting remote island communities to Mediterranean markets, North African luxuries, and continental power networks. Britain's merchants grew wealthy managing these connections, and their sophistication would have surprised any Roman who imagined finding only primitive barbarians beyond the Channel. Tin remained Britain's most valuable export, the metal that had drawn Mediterranean traders northward for over 1,000 years. Cornwall's tin deposits, among Europe's richest, provided the essential ingredient for bronze production throughout the classical world. By 300 BCE, the extraction and processing of tin ore had become highly organized. Miners followed lodes deep into hillsides, using fire-setting techniques to crack rock faces, then washing the crushed ore in elaborate sluices that separated metal from worthless stone. Stream tin, eroded naturally from bedrock and concentrated in river gravels, required less effort, but still demanded knowledge of geology and hydrology that few possessed. The logistics of moving Cornish tin to continental markets involved multiple middlemen, each taking their profit. Pack animals hauled ingots to channel ports like Hengistbury Head in Dorset, where the broad natural harbor attracted merchants from across the known world. Archaeological excavation has revealed this port's remarkable diversity: wine amphorae from Italy and Spain, pottery from Brittany, glass from the Rhine Valley, even figs from the Mediterranean. Gold coins from Armorica, the Celtic region that would become Brittany, appear in sufficient quantities to suggest regular monetary transactions rather than simple barter. Wine transformed elite Celtic life during these centuries. Before sustained Mediterranean contact, British nobility drank beer and mead, fermented beverages suited to northern climates. Wine arrived as exotic luxury, its consumption marking sophisticated cosmopolitanism. The amphorae that once contained it litter high-status British sites, their distinctive forms allowing archaeologists to trace trade routes with precision. Some wealthy Britons developed genuine connoisseurship, distinguishing Italian from Spanish vintages, preferring certain producers over others. Yet, the most troubling aspect of British commerce involved human cargo. Evidence suggests that Britain exported slaves to continental markets, though the scale remains debated. Classical writers mention British slaves fetching high prices in Gaul, prized for their strength and novelty. Whether these captives came from warfare between tribes, from raids specifically conducted to supply the trade, or from judicial punishments converting criminals into commodities, remains unclear. What seems certain is that by 50 BCE, slave trading had become integrated into the broader commercial network linking Britain to Rome's expanding empire. British hunting dogs earned particular reputation. Mediterranean aristocrats valued them for their size, courage, and tracking ability, paying remarkable prices for breeding stock. We know British dogs reached Roman tables not as companions but as warriors themselves, trained to fight in arenas alongside gladiators. This specialized export demonstrates how even unexpected products could find markets when reputation spread through commercial networks. These centuries of intensifying trade prepared Britain for what came next. The merchants, who had grown wealthy managing exchanges with the continent, began accumulating political power. Their children learned Latin, adopted Mediterranean fashions, built homes in Romano-Celtic hybrid styles. When Julius Caesar landed in 55 BCE, he found not isolated savages but a society already partially integrated into the Roman economic sphere, its elite fluent in the empire's ways, its ports busy with continental traffic. The question was no longer if Rome would come, but when, and whether British merchants would resist conquest or welcome the opportunities that closer imperial ties might bring. The Celtic year turned with the seasons, each month bringing prescribed labors that had sustained communities for generations. Spring plowing began when the soil softened enough for wooden ards, simple plows that scratched furrows without turning the earth. Teams of oxen pulled these implements across fields divided into rectangular plots by low earth banks, creating distinctive patterns still visible in aerial photography today. Farmers broadcast seed by hand, scattering wheat and barley across prepared ground, then harrowing to cover the grain before birds could feast. These field systems represented generations of accumulated knowledge. Crop rotation prevented soil exhaustion, with fields left fallow every few years to recover fertility. Communities grazed livestock on stubble after harvest, the animals' manure enriching depleted earth. Some evidence suggests Celtic farmers understood the value of legumes, planting beans and peas that restored nitrogen to tired soil, though whether they grasped the chemistry or simply observed successful results remains unknown. Cattle determined a man standing more surely than gold. A wealthy farmer might own 30 or 40 head, their milk providing cheese and butter, their strength pulling plows, their hides becoming leather, their meat feeding winter feasts. But cattle represented more than utility. They served as currency in societies where coinage remained uncommon, with legal fines, bride prices, and compensation for injuries all calculated in livestock. Stealing another's cattle ranked among the gravest offenses, punishable by death or enslavement. Sheep grazed hillsides too steep for cultivation, their wool clothing entire communities. Women spent winter months spinning thread and weaving cloth, creating the brightly colored cloaks and tunics that impressed classical observers. The distinctive checked patterns later called tartans may have originated in these centuries, with different tribes favoring particular color combinations that proclaimed identity to those who understood the visual language. Autumn brought the great feasts where social hierarchies were reinforced and challenged. After harvest, when storehouses bulged with grain and animals fattened on stubble, chieftains invited rivals and allies to elaborate celebrations lasting days. The host's generosity demonstrated his wealth and power. Guests received exact precedence according to their status, with warriors receiving the champion's portion, the choicest cut of meat that proved their valor. Disputes over seating arrangements and meat distribution sometimes erupted into violence as honor demanded recognition. Food preservation occupied autumn weeks. Women salted pork in ceramic vessels, packed cheese in wooden barrels, dried herbs and berries against winter scarcity. Grain storage required particular care, with raised granaries protecting harvests from rats and moisture. Underground storage pits, bell-shaped cavities lined with clay or wickerwork, kept grain dry in some regions, though once open these pits spoiled quickly, forcing consumption of entire contents. Winter brought the darkest months, when stored food sustained communities through frozen ground and early darkness. Cattle moved into byres attached to houses, their body heat warming human quarters while manure accumulated for spring spreading. Families gathered around central hearths, repairing tools, telling stories, waiting for the cycle to begin again when lengthening days announced spring's return. This rhythm, ancient and enduring, structured existence more powerfully than any chieftain's commands. By the middle of the 2nd century before the Common Era, power in Britain had begun consolidating in ways unprecedented in the island's history. The scattered hillforts and small tribal territories that had characterized earlier centuries were giving way to larger political units, as ambitious chieftains absorbed neighboring groups through conquest, marriage alliance, and calculated diplomacy. Some tribes now controlled territories spanning thousands of square miles, their influence extending across multiple river valleys and coastlines. The most visible sign of this transformation appeared around 150, before the Common Era, when the first coins were struck on British soil. These weren't crude imitations, but sophisticated pieces modeled on the gold staters of Philip II of Macedon, coins that had circulated through Gaul for generations. British moneyers created their own designs, abstracting the classical imagery until horses became geometric swirls and human profiles dissolved into patterns of crescents and pellets. Each tribal confederation developed distinctive styles, turning currency into declarations of political authority. Coinage represented more than economic convenience. It proclaimed that British rulers understood continental statecraft, that they participated in wider European networks of power. Chiefs who controlled minting demonstrated wealth sufficient to accumulate precious metals, authority to guarantee value, and sophistication to engage in monetary exchange. The appearance of individual names on later coins suggested something even more significant: the emergence of rulers powerful enough to stamp their personal authority onto metal that would circulate beyond their immediate control. These increasingly powerful leaders required new kinds of settlements. Traditional hillforts, while impressive, served primarily defensive functions. The emerging elite needed centers that combined defense with administration, craft production, and trade. The solution appeared in Oppida, sprawling proto-urban complexes unlike anything Britain had seen. These massive enclosures, some covering hundreds of acres, were ringed by substantial earthwork defenses, but contained organized internal zones. Craftsmen gathered in specific quarters, producing pottery, metalwork, and textiles. Storage facilities held accumulated wealth. Open spaces accommodated markets where goods from distant regions changed hands. The Oppida represented urban planning concepts borrowed from Gaul, where similar settlements had developed earlier. British rulers maintained close ties with Gallic tribes, particularly those controlling the Channel ports. These connections facilitated trade in luxury goods, transmission of political ideas, and occasionally direct intervention in British affairs. When Julius Caesar launched his first expedition to Britain in 55 before the Common Era, he was continuing conflicts that had already spilled across the Channel. Commius exemplified these cross-channel connections. A Gallic chieftain of the Atrebates, he maintained such strong ties to British tribes that Caesar appointed him as an intermediary before the invasion. But Commius's loyalties proved more complex than the Roman general anticipated. After initially cooperating, Commius turned against Rome, eventually fleeing Gaul to establish himself in southern Britain. His arrival demonstrated how fluid political boundaries had become, how ambitious rulers could seek power bases across the narrow seas. Social stratification intensified as wealth concentrated in fewer hands. Archaeological evidence reveals growing disparities in burial goods and settlement quality. Elite compounds featured imported Mediterranean luxuries, fine metalwork, elaborate personal ornaments. Common farmers' homesteads showed little change from earlier centuries. This widening gap reflected fundamental shifts in power distribution, as successful rulers accumulated resources that reinforced their dominance through gift-giving, feast hosting, and maintenance of armed followings. When Roman sails appeared off the British coast in late summer of 55 before the Common Era, they encountered not primitive tribes but sophisticated political entities with diplomatic experience, monetary systems, and rulers whose ambitions had already reached across the Channel. The cliffs of Dover shone brilliant white in the late August sun of 55 before the Common Era as nearly 100 Roman ships approached the British shore. Julius Caesar, already famous for his conquest of Gaul, stood on the lead vessel surveying the coastline that had remained beyond Rome's grasp. Thousands of British warriors lined the cliffs above, weapons glinting, their war cries carrying across the water. The general quickly realized his landing site was indefensible. He ordered the fleet to sail northeast along the coast, searching for a beach where his legions could come ashore without being slaughtered from above. The British forces shadowed the fleet, matching its progress along the shoreline. When the Romans finally attempted to land near modern Deal, they faced a terrifying sight. Celtic warriors charged into the surf on horseback and in chariots, hurling spears at the crowded transport ships while infantry waded forward with shields locked. The legionaries, weighed down by armor and equipment, hesitated at their ships' sides. How could they fight in chest-deep water against an enemy that seemed to dance across the waves? The situation resolved only when the standard bearer of the 10th Legion leaped into the sea, shouting that he would carry the sacred eagle forward with or without his comrades. Shamed into action, the legionaries followed. The beach battle proved vicious and confused, Romans struggling to form ranks while standing in surf, Britons exploiting their mobility to strike and withdraw. Eventually, Roman discipline prevailed, but the victory felt hollow. Caesar's cavalry transports, delayed by storms, never arrived. Without mounted troops, the Romans could not pursue fleeing enemies or scout unfamiliar territory effectively. Worse troubles followed. The tide rose higher than Mediterranean-trained sailors anticipated, swamping beached vessels. Storm winds battered ships still at anchor, smashing some against each other, driving others onto rocks. Within days of landing, nearly a third of Caesar's fleet was damaged or destroyed. The British tribes, initially cowed by their defeat on the beach, recognized Roman vulnerability. They gathered forces and launched attacks on foraging parties. Caesar found himself trapped on a hostile shore with dwindling supplies and no clear path forward. After one sharp engagement where coordinated chariot tactics nearly overwhelmed a Roman cohort, the British leaders approached under truce. They offered hostages, promised tribute, and agreed to cease hostilities. Caesar, relieved to escape with his reputation intact, accepted these terms. In mid-September, barely 3 weeks after arriving, the Roman fleet limped back toward Gaul. The hostages and tribute never materialized. The following summer, Caesar returned with overwhelming force. 5 legions and 2,000 cavalry crossed in 800 ships, the largest amphibious assault yet launched in European waters. This time, the sheer scale of the invasion deterred immediate resistance. The Romans established a secure beachhead and marched inland, crossing the Thames and pushing deep into southeastern Britain. Cassivellaunus, leader of the Catavellani tribe north of the Thames, emerged as the principal coordinator of British resistance. He abandoned traditional pitched battles that favored Roman discipline, instead employing tactics that exploited British advantages. His forces harassed Roman columns with hit-and-run attacks, destroyed crops and livestock to deny the invaders supplies, and used their superior knowledge of terrain to ambush foraging parties. Most devastatingly, Cassivellaunus deployed thousands of chariots in coordinated strikes that appeared from nowhere and vanished before Roman infantry could respond effectively. Yet, the tribal confederations that might have stopped Rome failed to unite completely. Some groups, particularly those with grievances against Cassivellaunus, provided intelligence to Caesar or simply refused to fight. The Trinovantes of Essex, recently conquered by Cassivellaunus, actively aided the Romans in exchange for protection. This division proved fatal to British hopes. Caesar's legions eventually captured Cassivellaunus's stronghold somewhere north of the Thames. The British leader, his options exhausted, negotiated surrender. He agreed to annual tribute payments to Rome, promised to cease aggression against Roman allies in Britain, and provided high-ranking hostages. In late September of 54, before the Common Era, Caesar departed Britain for the second and final time. He had achieved nominal submission without true conquest, adding Britain to Rome's sphere of influence without the cost of permanent occupation. The departure of Caesar's legions marked not an end to Roman influence, but its transformation into something more insidious than military conquest. For nearly a century, Britain existed in a peculiar state between independence and imperial orbit, its kingdoms growing wealthy while slowly voluntarily becoming more Roman than their ancestors could have imagined. The Cativolani, whom Caesar had humbled but not destroyed, recovered with remarkable speed. From their territory north of the Thames, they expanded steadily, absorbing neighboring peoples through conquest, marriage alliances, and political maneuvering. By the first decade of the Common Era, they had grown into Britain's dominant power, controlling much of the southeast and extracting tribute from client tribes. The annual payments to Rome promised by Cassivellaunus had long since ceased with no consequence whatsoever. Around the year 10 of the Common Era, a new ruler ascended to Catuvillanian power. Cunobelinus, whose name meant Hound of Belinos, would reign for 3 decades and become the most powerful British monarch before the Roman conquest. From his capital at Camulodunum, he presided over what contemporary observers described as a kingdom, not merely a tribe. His coins, struck in silver and gold, bore Latin inscriptions alongside Celtic symbols. He styled himself Rex on some issues, adopting Roman terminology while maintaining traditional British imagery of horses and grain stalks. Trade with the Roman Empire flourished under Cunobelinus. Wine amphorae from Italy piled up in British Oppida. Roman pottery, glassware, and metalwork became status symbols among the tribal elite. British exports flowed in return: grain, gold, silver, slaves, hunting dogs, and the valuable tin that had first drawn Mediterranean interest to these islands. Merchants from Gaul established permanent trading posts. Some British nobles sent their sons to be educated in Roman cities, where they learned Latin, adopted Tagaz, and absorbed Mediterranean customs. Yet this Romanization, dramatic as it appeared, remained superficial. British society retained its fundamental character. Druids still wielded spiritual authority. Warrior culture still valued martial prowess above all. Tribal affiliations still determined identity. The transformation occurred only among the elite, creating an aristocracy comfortable in both worlds while the vast majority of Britons continued living as their grandparents had. Regional tensions simmered beneath this veneer of prosperity. The Atrebates of southern Britain, ruled by King Boudicca, maintained close ties with Rome, perhaps too close for some. When internal opposition forced Boudicca from his throne around the year 40 of the Common Era, the elderly king fled across the Channel to seek Roman protection. He arrived in Rome itself, prostrating himself before Emperor Claudius with tales of British wealth and political instability. In the palaces of Rome, where ambitious emperors sought military glory to legitimize their rule, an exiled British king's plea would find receptive ears. The century between empires was drawing to a close. The spring of 43 brought 4 Roman legions to the shores of Kent. 40,000 men, the largest military force ever assembled for a British campaign, crowded into transport ships under the command of Aulus Plautius, a senator with proven military credentials. The 2nd Augusta, the 9th Hispana, the 14th Gemina, and the 20th Valeria Victrix represented Rome's professional military machine at its peak, supplemented by an equal number of auxiliary troops drawn from across the empire. They landed at Richborough on the eastern coast, where natural harbors offered protection and a defensible beachhead. Unlike Caesar's contested landing a century earlier, Plautius met no immediate resistance. The British had withdrawn inland, perhaps hoping to draw the Romans into unfamiliar terrain, perhaps simply unprepared for an invasion of this magnitude. The legions established a fortified supply base and began their methodical advance toward the heart of Catuvillanian territory. The first major confrontation came at the River Medway, where British forces had assembled under Togodumnus and Keratakis, sons of the recently deceased Cunobelinus. The brothers had split their father's kingdom, but now united against the common threat. They positioned their warriors behind the river's protective barrier, believing the Romans would struggle to force a crossing under fire. Claudius had anticipated this strategy. He sent auxiliary units of Batavians, Germanic troops recruited from the Rhine frontier who were trained to swim rivers in full equipment. They crossed under cover of darkness, targeting not the British warriors but their chariot horses. Without mobility, the British advantage dissolved. While the Batavians sowed chaos, Claudius ordered his main force across. The battle raged for 2 days. Roman discipline and superior siege equipment gradually overcame British ferocity. When the fighting ended, Togodumnus lay dead and Caratacus had retreated westward with the remnants of his army. The legions pushed forward to the Thames, establishing control over the crucial river crossing. Here, Claudius paused. He had achieved his immediate military objectives, but imperial politics demanded a grander spectacle. Word was sent to Rome that the emperor's presence was required for the final, glorious act. Claudius arrived in Britain that summer, having traveled overboard despite his physical disabilities that made him an unlikely conqueror. He brought with him not just reinforcements, but elephants. War elephants had not been seen in European warfare for generations. Their psychological impact on the Britons, who had never encountered such creatures, was precisely what Claudius intended. The animals trumpeted and stamped as the emperor led his enlarged army toward Camulodunum. The Catuvellaunian capital fell without prolonged siege. Its elaborate defenses, designed to resist tribal rivals, proved inadequate against Roman engineering. Claudius spent 16 days in Britain, just long enough to receive the formal submission of 11 British kings who pledged themselves as client rulers of Rome. He declared victory, claimed Britain as a province, and departed for Rome to celebrate a triumph. The ceremonial conquest was complete. The actual conquest had barely begun. Beyond the Thames Valley, most of Britain remained unconquered, unconvinced, and increasingly hostile to Roman presence. Keratakis had escaped to continue resistance. The Druids maintained their authority. Countless tribes had not submitted. Rome had planted its eagles in British soil, but whether those standards would remain or be torn down remained an open question. Caratacus refused to accept his brother's death as the end of British resistance. While 11 kings bent the knee to Claudius in Camulodunum, the surviving prince moved westward into the hill country of what is now Wales, where Roman legions would find no open battlefields to exploit their advantages in discipline and equipment. The mountains and forests of the west offered something more valuable than fortifications: terrain that negated Roman superiority. Here, narrow valleys and steep hillsides made coordinated legion movements impossible. Swift-moving British warriors who knew every path and stream could strike Roman supply columns and disappear before reinforcements arrived. Caratacus transformed himself from a conventional war leader into something Rome had rarely encountered: a guerrilla commander who understood that survival itself was a form of victory. The Silures, a powerful tribe inhabiting the valleys of South Wales, recognized in Caratacus a leader worth following. Unlike the Catuvellaunians, whose wealth had made them cautious, the Silures were warriors who valued courage above accommodation. They provided Caratacus with fighters, knowledge of the terrain, and a population willing to support prolonged resistance. Together, they waged a campaign of ambushes and raids that tied down entire legions and made the occupation far costlier than Rome had anticipated. For 8 years, Keratakis remained at large. Roman commanders rotated through Britain, each promising to end the British insurgency, each failing. Supply trains burned. Isolated garrisons faced night attacks. Small detachments sent to pacify valleys simply vanished. The Second Augusta, pushing into the southwest under the future Emperor Vespasian, found itself fighting a different kind of war than its legionaries had trained for, one where traditional Roman advantages meant little in dense forest combat. In 51, the new Roman governor, Publius Ostorius Scapula, finally cornered Caratacus in the territory of the Ordovices in central Wales. The British commander, pressured by Roman persistence and perhaps overconfident after years of successful resistance, made a fatal decision. He accepted a set-piece battle on ground he believed favorable, positioning his warriors on a hillside protected by rough stone ramparts with a river barrier below. The Romans adapted. They waded through the river under a hail of British missiles, then formed testudo formations, shields locked overhead against the stones raining down from above. Legionaries dismantled the crude British fortifications while maintaining defensive cohesion. When they breached the ramparts, the battle became a rout. British resistance collapsed into flight. Keratakis escaped the battlefield, but not the aftermath. The Queen of the Brigantes, Rome's client ruler in the north, betrayed him. Cartimandua handed the fugitive prince to his enemies in chains. Paraded through Rome's streets as a captive, Keratakis was brought before Emperor Claudius. The Roman crowd expected groveling from a defeated barbarian. Instead, the British prince delivered words that echoed through imperial history. He gestured at Rome's marble splendor and asked why men who possessed such magnificence coveted British huts. He noted that his resistance, though ultimately futile, had brought Rome more glory than easy victory would have provided. He concluded by asking what honor there was in killing a man who had fought so long with such courage. Claudius, moved or calculating that clemency would demonstrate Roman magnanimity, spared both Keratakis and his family. They lived out their days in Rome as honored prisoners, symbols of both British defiance and Roman mercy. The resistance, however, was far from over. In 60, 17 years after Caratacus marched through Roman chains, a new threat emerged from an unexpected quarter. The Iceni of East Anglia had remained neutral during the initial conquest, their king Prasutagus maintaining careful relations with Roman authorities. His territory lay far from the fighting in Wales, his people prosperous from trade. When Prasutagus died, he attempted to secure his family's future through his will, naming his 2 daughters as co-heirs alongside Emperor Nero himself. Rome saw opportunity where Prasutagus had seen protection. Imperial agents arrived to claim what they considered their inheritance, treating the entire Iceni kingdom as property to be liquidated. They seized lands, called in debts, and began reducing free Britons to slavery. When Prasutagus' widow, Queen Boudica, protested this violation of her husband's arrangement, Roman soldiers responded with calculated brutality. They flogged the queen publicly. They raped her daughters. The message was clear: client kingdoms existed at Rome's pleasure, and British royal blood commanded no respect. The humiliation of their queen ignited the Iceni. Across East Anglia, warriors gathered. The neighboring Trinovantes, still seething over land confiscations around Camalodunum, joined them. Unlike Keratakis' Western guerrilla campaign, this would be something far more visceral, a war of vengeance aimed at erasing Rome's presence entirely. Timing favored the rebels. Governor Gaius Suetonius Paulinus had marched the 14th and 20th legions to the far northwest, conducting a brutal campaign against the Druid stronghold on Anglesey. The island's sacred groves, centers of British spiritual resistance, were burning when news reached Paulinus that eastern Britain had exploded into revolt. Camalodunum fell first. The former Cativalonian capital, now a Roman colony settled with military veterans, had grown complacent in perceived security. Its inhabitants had built a grand temple to the deified Emperor Claudius, but neglected basic fortifications. When 80,000 British warriors descended on the town, there were no walls to shelter behind. The colonists barricaded themselves in the temple, where they held out for 2 days before the building was stormed and burned. Every Roman man, woman, and child in Camalodunum died. The city itself was methodically destroyed. A relief force from the 9th Legion, marching south from Lincoln, walked into an ambush. British warriors killed most of the infantry. The survivors fled. Boudica's army moved south toward Londinium. The commercial hub on the Thames had grown wealthy, facilitating trade between Britain and the continent, its warehouses full, its port busy. Governor Paulinus, racing ahead of his legions, reached London first. He made a ruthless calculation. The settlement could not be defended with available forces. He ordered evacuation. Those who could flee did so. Those who remained, perhaps hoping British fury would pass, perhaps unable to abandon homes and businesses, learned otherwise. Londinium burned as completely as Camalodunum. Archaeologists would later find a thick layer of reddish ash across the Roman city, mixed with melted coins and pottery, evidence of fire so intense they fused objects together. Verulamium, northwest of London, was next. The tribal capital of the Cativalonians, now Romanized and prosperous, shared Londinium's fate. 3 cities obliterated. Roman sources claim 70,000 dead, though the number may be inflated. What remained undeniable was the scale of destruction. In weeks, Boudica had accomplished what Caratacus had never achieved in 8 years. She had brought Rome to the edge of abandoning Britain entirely. Nero's advisors in Rome debated withdrawal. The province seemed more trouble than its wealth warranted. Then word arrived of Suetonius Paulinus' response. The governor had concentrated his available forces, perhaps 10,000 men against Boudica's vastly larger army. Somewhere in the Midlands, location debated by historians ever since, the Romans chose their ground carefully, a defile with forest protecting their flanks, forcing the British to attack uphill into disciplined ranks. The victory over Boudica's rebellion, achieved through 10,000 disciplined legionaries destroying an army many times their size, clarified Roman strategic thinking. Superior military organization could defeat any number of Celtic warriors in open battle. Yet, Governor Suetonius Paulinus understood that military conquest alone could not secure Britain. The Druids, whom he had been attacking when Boudica rose, represented something more dangerous than armed resistance. They were the living memory of Celtic identity, the carriers of laws and genealogies, the interpreters of divine will who legitimized resistance itself. Roman sources depict the Druids with mingled fascination and horror. Pliny the Elder described their sacred rites in forest clearings, their harvesting of mistletoe with golden sickles, their supposed human sacrifices. Julius Caesar, centuries earlier, had written of druidic schools where students memorized vast bodies of oral tradition, forbidden to commit sacred knowledge to writing. Whether these accounts were accurate or propaganda justifying suppression, Rome viewed Druidism as incompatible with imperial order. The island of Anglesey, called Mona by the Romans, served as Druidism's beating heart. Protected by treacherous waters off the Welsh coast, the island housed sacred groves and training schools. British aristocrats sent their children there to learn the ancient ways. Refugees from conquered territories sought sanctuary in its temples. For Rome, Anglesey represented an ideological enemy stronghold, a place where resistance could be spiritually sustained even after military defeat. Suetonius had been preparing to assault Anglesey when Boudica struck. Now, with eastern Britain pacified through brutal retaliation, he returned to unfinished business. In 61, Roman forces assembled on the Welsh coast opposite Mona. Engineers constructed flat-bottomed boats for infantry while cavalry prepared to swim their horses across the strait. The defenders waiting on Anglesey's beaches understood what was at stake. Warriors stood ready, but among them were Druids in white robes, their arms raised to the heavens, calling down curses on the invaders. Women dressed in black ran among the ranks, shrieking prophecies, torches held high. The Roman historian Tacitus described his father-in-law Agricola, then a young officer, witnessing the scene with superstitious dread. For a moment, the legionaries hesitated before this wall of fury and supernatural threat. Then discipline reasserted itself. Officers rallied their men with contempt for barbarian magic. The boats pushed off. Cavalry entered the water. Within hours, Rome's professional soldiers had cut through the defenders. What followed was systematic annihilation. Warriors died fighting. Druids died at their altars. The sacred groves, centers of worship for centuries, were cut down and burned. Springs considered holy were polluted. Stone circles were toppled. Suetonius intended to erase not just a military threat, but the physical spaces where Celtic spirituality had flourished. The assault on Anglesey was never truly completed. Boudica's revolt interrupted it, and afterward. Though Suetonius claimed victory, pockets of Druidic practice survived in remote corners of Britain. Yet the destruction of their central sanctuary broke something fundamental. Without Anglesey's schools, Druidic knowledge began to fade. Without their authority figures, Celtic legal systems eroded. Without their ritual calendar, the old ways lost coherence. Roman law subsequently forbade Druidic practices throughout the empire. The religion retreated to Ireland, beyond Rome's reach, where it would eventually be transformed and absorbed by Christianity. In Britain itself, the Druids became ghosts, remembered in place names and folk tales, but no longer shaping the present. With their spiritual leadership shattered and their military resistance broken, Celtic Britain entered a new phase. Rome would spend the next decade consolidating control, transforming conquered territory into a functioning province where Latin, Roman law, and Mediterranean culture would gradually reshape ancient ways. The pacification of southern Britain created a paradox. Military success bred territorial ambition. If disciplined legions could defeat Celtic armies 10 times their size, why stop at the lowlands? Beyond the conquered zone lay Caledonia, the wild northern reaches where tribal confederations remained untouched by Roman power. The mountains there promised mineral wealth. The coastline offered strategic harbors. And the tribes, though fierce, seemed no different from those already subdued. In 77, a new governor arrived with precisely this expansionist vision. Gnaeus Julius Agricola had served in Britain before, witnessing Boudica's revolt as a young officer and participating in the Anglesey campaign. Now commanding 4 legions and their auxiliary forces, he drove northward with methodical determination. His campaigns combined military aggression with political calculation. Tribes willing to submit received favorable treatment, while resistors faced devastation. Agricola understood that conquering terrain meant controlling resources. His forces built roads as they advanced, establishing forts at strategic intervals. Supply lines stretched from York through the Scottish lowlands. Each summer brought new territorial gains. Each winter consolidated the previous year's conquests. Agricola's advance seemed unstoppable. The Caledonian tribes, watching Rome's relentless approach, recognized the threat. Unlike southern Britain's fragmented kingdoms, they unified under a chieftain named Caratacus. Tribal differences mattered less than survival. In 83 or 84, somewhere in the northern highlands at a place called Mons Groupius, 30,000 Caledonian warriors gathered to face Agricola's army. The battle followed a familiar pattern. Caledonian forces held high ground, their numbers initially intimidating. But Agricola deployed auxiliary infantry first, preserving his legions in reserve. Celtic chariots charged. Caledonian swordsmen crashed into Roman shields. For hours, the outcome remained uncertain. Then Roman cavalry outflanked the tribal position. The Highland warriors, fierce in individual combat but lacking Roman cohesion, broke when attacked from multiple directions. Thousands died in the rout. Caratacus disappeared from history. Tacitus, Agricola's son-in-law and biographer, claimed his father had conquered all Caledonia, that the circumnavigation of Britain by Roman ships proved total victory. Yet actions revealed different realities. Within years, Rome abandoned its northernmost forts. Legions withdrew to more defensible positions. The mountains proved too vast, the tribes too elusive, the supply lines too stretched. Military victory had not translated into sustainable occupation. By 122, under Emperor Hadrian, Rome acknowledged what its generals had learned through costly experience. Britain had a natural limit. That year, construction began on the most ambitious frontier fortification the empire ever built. From the Tene to the Solway, spanning 73 miles of northern England, a stone wall rose 15 feet high, reinforced by forts, watchtowers, and garrison posts. Hadrian's wall represented more than military pragmatism. It proclaimed that beyond this line lay chaos, barbarity, a world Rome chose not to civilize. On the wall's southern side, Latin-speaking towns would flourish. On the northern side, Celtic tribes would remain forever unconquered. The wall marked where Roman Britain ended and the Celtic world endured, a stone declaration that even the empire's power had boundaries. South of Hadrian's wall, a remarkable transformation was underway. Within 2 generations of the conquest, Britons who had once painted themselves with woad and fought naked against Roman shields were now wearing togas, speaking Latin, and bathing in heated pools beneath mosaic floors. The fusion happened gradually, almost imperceptibly as Celtic culture absorbed Roman customs while retaining its essential character. Towns became the crucibles of this change. Verulamium, Londinium, Eboracum, once simple tribal settlements, now boasted forums where citizens gathered to conduct business in Latin. Public baths, those quintessential Roman institutions, rose in every significant town. Here, men from Celtic families soaked alongside Roman merchants, their conversations blending tribal politics with imperial affairs. The distinction between conqueror and conquered blurred in the warm steam. For the wealthy, the villa represented the pinnacle of Romano-British identity. These weren't merely country houses. They were statements of belonging. A tribal chieftain's grandson might commission heated floors, painted walls depicting classical mythology, and dining rooms designed for Roman-style banquets. Yet the same villa might include shrines to Celtic deities, its mosaics incorporating traditional spiral patterns alongside Mediterranean designs. The building itself embodied cultural synthesis. This hybrid identity extended to religion in fascinating ways. Romans had always been pragmatic about gods. When they encountered Celtic deities, they didn't demand abandonment of old faiths. Instead, syncretism became the norm. Sul, the Celtic goddess of the hot springs at Bath, became Sulis Minerva, merged with Rome's goddess of wisdom. Nodens, a healing god, gained Roman architectural grandeur at his temple in Lydney. Mars acquired Celtic epithets, becoming Mars Bellatukadros or Mars Cassidius, depending on the region. Ordinary Britons hedged their spiritual bets. They might sacrifice to Jupiter at the public temple, fulfilling civic obligations, then privately honor ancestral spirits at rural shrines. Christianity, arriving in the 2nd century through soldiers and merchants, added another layer to this religious complexity. By 200, Britain had Christian communities, though they remained a minority, one more option in a spiritually diverse landscape. Latin literacy spread through practical necessity. Legal documents required it. Trade contracts demanded it. Ambitious families ensured their children learned it. Yet Celtic languages persisted in homes, villages, and countryside. Britain became bilingual, its population switching between tongues depending on context. A farmer might negotiate grain prices in Latin at the market, then return home to speak Brittonic with his family. Celtic artistic traditions proved remarkably resilient. Metalworkers still crafted brooches and torques, though now they might incorporate Roman techniques. Potters shaped vessels using traditional Celtic forms while decorating them with Mediterranean patterns. The La Tène style didn't disappear. It adapted, creating something neither purely Celtic nor wholly Roman, but distinctly Romano-British. Class determined how completely one embraced the new culture. Wealthy families sent sons to study rhetoric, wore Italian fashions, and built urban townhouses. But in rural areas where most Britons still lived, change came more slowly. Farmers worked the same fields their ancestors had tended. They spoke the old language. They honored the old gods. They remembered. By 300, Britain had become a strange amalgam. Cities hummed with Latin conversations and classical architecture. Villas dotted the countryside, their owners proudly Roman in appearance and aspiration. Yet, beneath this Roman veneer, Celtic Britain persisted. The island had not been erased. It had transformed, creating a unique provincial culture that was neither conqueror nor conquered, but something altogether new. The legions departed in 410, recalled to defend a crumbling empire. What they left behind seemed destined to vanish within a generation. Roman villas fell into disrepair. Towns emptied as trade networks collapsed. The Latin-speaking elite fled or perished in waves of Saxon invasion. Yet Celtic Britain, that ancient culture predating Rome by centuries, refused to die. In the west and north, where Roman influence had always been weakest, Celtic languages survived unbroken. Wales, Cornwall, Scotland, Ireland, these became refuges where the old tongues continued in daily use. When Anglo-Saxon kingdoms consolidated control over the eastern lowlands, they found themselves ruling a divided island. The newcomers spoke Germanic languages and worshipped Germanic gods. But in the hills and valleys beyond their reach, Britons still told stories in their ancestral speech, still honored traditions stretching back to the Iron Age. Christianity, ironically, became Celtic culture's salvation. Irish monks, never conquered by Rome, preserved Celtic learning while adding literacy and organizational structure. They established monasteries that became centers of art and scholarship. The Book of Kells, created around 800, represents this cultural flowering. Its intricate interlaced patterns echo Latin designs from 1,000 years earlier, demonstrating unbroken artistic continuity through centuries of upheaval. Medieval Celtic culture experienced revival and reinvention. Welsh poets maintained bardic traditions, their verses preserving ancient genealogies and legends. The Mabinogion, compiled in the 12th and 13th centuries, contained tales whose roots extended deep into the pre-Roman past. Arthur, that possibly historical war leader who fought Saxon invaders, became a repository of Celtic mythological themes. His court incorporated elements recognizable to Bronze Age chieftains. Yet Celtic identity nearly vanished from popular consciousness. English dominance marginalized Welsh and Scottish cultures. Highland traditions faced systematic suppression after 1745. Celtic languages seemed headed for extinction. Then Romanticism arrived. 18th and 19th century scholars and poets, reacting against industrial modernization, discovered Celtic culture's appeal. James Macpherson's Ossian poems, though largely fabricated, sparked fascination with supposed Celtic mysticism. Serious scholars began studying Celtic languages systematically. The realization dawned that these weren't primitive dialects but sophisticated tongues preserving Europe's oldest vernacular literature. The 20th century witnessed remarkable Celtic resurgence. Ireland achieved independence, making Irish an official language. Welsh language education expanded dramatically. Scottish Gaelic found new champions. These movements weren't nostalgic recreations but assertions of living identity, communities reclaiming heritage that had survived against extraordinary odds. Archaeology continues revealing Celtic Britain's complexity. Excavations uncover settlements, graves, and artifacts demonstrating sophisticated pre-Roman society. Those warlike barbarians of Roman propaganda emerge as skilled craftspeople, traders, and artists. Their culture, far from being obliterated, adapted and persisted. Stand today in Western Scotland or rural Wales. Listen to conversations in Gaelic or Welsh, descendants of languages spoken when Rome was merely one Italian city among many. Examine Celtic artwork in museums, those spirals and curves that captivated craftspeople 3,000 years ago and still inspire artists today. The Romans came, conquered, and departed. But Celtic Britain, that ancient culture they could never fully erase, endures. In language, in art, in memory, the voices echo still. The Celts built a civilization that outlasted empires, their voices still echoing in the languages, art, and landscapes of modern Britain. Subscribe to explore more hidden chapters of our ancient past.